My name is Dr. Chris Jenkins, and I am the CEO of the Orianne Society and the host of the Snake Talk podcast, the podcast where you learn about nature's most feared, maligned, and persecuted animals. I invite you to listen to this conversation, and maybe you'll find that what you perceive as fear is actually rooted in a deep fascination. Welcome to the Snake Talk podcast. I am here with Romey Swanson. Romey lives in a very herp diverse region. He's down in Texas, and he is the executive director of the Devils River Conservancy. So we're going to talk about a lot of things today, but we'll certainly talk about land conservation and herp diversity in that part of Texas. But he's also kind of a very avid, herp enthusiast, and he's done a big year, if you will, for reptiles in Texas. So we're going to talk about that as well. So welcome to the podcast, Romey. How are you doing today?
Chris, thank you. I'm happy to be here. Been a long time listener, and always enjoy an opportunity to tell a few good stories and to visit with some cool folks.
Yeah, great. I'm looking forward to it as well. It sounds like you've heard a number of the episodes, so you know right where we're gonna begin. But I like to learn a little bit more about my guests, and I like to start at the beginning. And I'm just curious if this interest you have in reptiles and snakes, is that something that you've always had? Were you born with it as a child, or is it something that kind of hit you later in life? How did that come together for you?
Well, Chris, it was there in the very beginning. I can tell you that my mother loves to regale any audience with the stories of my childhood. So I'll share that I'm not a native born Texan. I'm naturalized. I've been here for a long time. I was born in West Virginia. And we lived in some rural countryside up in West Virginia. And one of the best attributes of my childhood was the unstructured free time my parents allowed me to have that you see so limited these days, it seems. But my best friend was effectively a creek, and the creatures that it held that was directly adjacent to my home. And that's where my exploration and appreciation for nature originated. My mom loved to tell the story that I mentioned of always having to check the pockets before washing clothes because inevitably a frog or some creature would be living inside of them. And we had big hearts and didn't want to wash the animals that unfortunately had been collected by me. So I had that kind of habit of appreciation, be it little snapping turtles, small frogs. Anytime you could see a snake was a wonderful day. And that's where it started. But when we moved here, I was 11 when my mother lived here. And as a teenage boy, I became more interested in playing football, which is a very Texas thing. And then also, more interested in the opposite sex than the creepy crawlies out there. So there was a period of time in my later childhood where I sort of paid attention to other things, but inevitably back in college, whenever you have some free choice and start to see opportunities that you didn't know existed, in my case, wildlife management and conservation, that was an opportunity for me to reemphasize something that was always inborn, always a very important part. And I got to focus my studies not just on wildlife, but particularly in the niche of reptiles and amphibians, which had always interested me.
Yeah, that's
the route right there.
Yeah, so let's go back to West Virginia first. So, West Virginia, for people who haven't been there, just incredibly beautiful state, one of the more rural and wild states in the country, certainly east of Mississippi. So, really the entire state's mountainous in a sense, but the eastern part has some pretty significant mountains. So, were you more eastern, up near the National Forest, or what part of the state were you in West Virginia?
I grew up in more of the southwestern portion of the state, closer to the tri-state area: Kentucky, West Virginia, Ohio. I was born in Huntington, but lived closer to Charleston, the state capital of West Virginia.
Yeah.
And again, I don't, uh, you know, where I grew up was rural at that time, but I think it's one of the more heavily developed areas these days as things change anywhere. Seems like everywhere I've ever lived has been a place of growth. So even when I went and visited a couple of years ago, after a decade gone, it didn't look super familiar to me any longer.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. But yeah, anyways, West Virginia, it's a beautiful, beautiful state. Down in that part of the
Yeah.
state, you'd be close. Would you be getting close to like Hatfield McCoy country? Is that southwest?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that's right. That's right. So I don't know all the circumstances around that, but I certainly heard a lot of it and heard that my family was never involved, but also it was a part of the local culture for sure.
Gotcha. Huh. So, as you may know, timber rattlesnakes are one of my just favorite animals on the planet. Did you ever have a chance to
Right.
bump into a timber rattlesnake when you're in West Virginia? Or?
Never saw one in West Virginia, but I've seen a few in Texas.
Yeah. Okay. I've never seen one in Texas. Well, let me think. I don't think I have. No, I haven't. I haven't seen one in Texas. So, but we can talk about that when we get on to talking a little bit more
Absolutely.
about Texas. So you ended up, it sounds like moving to Texas, kind of late elementary
Right.
school, middle school time frame, and
Right.
you're in Austin now. Is that where you moved when you moved to Texas, or?
No, I grew up on the Texas Gulf Coast, a little south of Houston, in a town near Bay City, Texas. It's an even smaller town that I actually grew up in, but the biggest kind of identifiable town is a town called Bay City. Did my junior high and high school there, and then effectively moved off to Central Texas for college. Kind of bounced back and forth during early college days between home and here in Central Texas. But I've effectively, planted and grown roots in what we call the hill country of Central Texas now for almost 2 decades. So this is truly home for me now.
Yeah, and from a previous conversation we had, you mentioned you came out to go to it's Texas State, correct, in San Marcos,
Right.
and
I'll admit, how old I am. When I began, it was Southwest Texas State University. They went through a name change around 2000 or 2001, and so I
okay.
graduated from Texas State, but I began at Southwest Texas State University.
Gotcha. So, did you move there particularly for that? And you mentioned that going into college, you had this interest or this focus on snakes and reptiles and the environment. So, did you go to Texas State, we'll call it, with that in mind? You were going there to study the environment and wildlife, or did you start somewhere else?
No, no, no. Actually, I started with no idea what I was going to be doing, and I always had a bit of a sciencey kind of background. I think my interests were maybe a little bit more around sports medicine as my first initial kind of interest in college, chemistry. But I'll fully admit that while I was trying to figure out my path, one day, I love telling this story. I found a flyer in the biology building. I think I was taking some undergraduate biology classes, and I saw a flyer for a little student group called the Student Chapter of the Wildlife Society at Texas State University. And the flyer promised live animals and free pizza, which for a person with my sort of background might as well have been a bunch of candy baited in a trap. I was hooked. Went to the first meeting and realized that not only was wildlife and nature a viable degree path, but also a viable career. And that moment really sort of changed the trajectory of my work, of my life, and in a very positive way. And that's where I really got to rediscover those same elements of that unstructured nature play as a child that could be incorporated into not just a degree plan, but a career track. And that's where this opportunity was the one that really kind of pushed me along this route.
Okay, so you go to a Wildlife Society meeting as an undergrad. I used to participate in Wildlife Society as well as an undergrad. It was incredibly inspiring. I don't know about down there, but we'd have people come in and give us presentations on black bear ecology and woodcock
Right.
and whatever it might be. It was just fascinating for me and really helped launch my career. So, did you end up staying in sports medicine and just kind of doing Wildlife Society on the side, or did you transition your degree? How did you continue through your undergrad?
I think at the time I was at that moment. I think I was sort of on a chemistry track, and then I changed my degree for a biology major and a chemistry minor. And I mean, it was effectively that moment. It was. I grew up as a person in my family that was one of the first to go to college, and so I didn't have a great tutelage or mentorship on what to how to approach college. And I was figuring it out on my own, and I was doing more of like what I believed was expected of me, as opposed to what really galvanized or resonated with me. And again, that moment changed everything. And I said, this is what I want. I think I could figure out how to make a career out of something that I enjoy being adjacent to and around, and have a personal mission for. And all of that alignment. I think I snapped my fingers, and the first opportunity changed my degree. I started learning the faculty, the class structures, and I even refined my degree for wildlife biology with a management emphasis, and eventually transitioned straight into graduate school there at the same university. So
You,
yeah,
it's,
that was it.
it's amazing how those transformations. I have a similar trajectory in a sense. First of all, at high school, I hit my, football and chasing women phase, and that continued into college. And then
Yeah,
but when I found, I wasn't a wildlife major originally, but, a year to 2 years in, I found that. And again, same story as you, like it all of a sudden took up 99% of everything in my life, and almost every decision I made was structured around that and how to move ahead. So you ended up staying at Texas State to go to graduate school. And again, I did the same thing. I
right.
did my
Yeah.
master's where I did my bachelor's. So how was that process? So you finished your undergrad, and how did you end up at the same university? Had you kind of built relationships with faculty, or what
Right.
was it that kept you there?
Yeah, and I was very well of the prevailing, sort of wisdom of moving on to when you do your graduate studies, moving on to a different institution. But at the time, I had a very young son, and so a toddler. I wasn't married, and my son's mother and I split our time with my son. I had a lot of infrastructure through undergraduate that supported me being able to have my son with me through graduate studies and through courses. So I decided that it was in my best interest to stick there where I had that support, and faculty generally were also supportive of my untraditional path. So a lot of it was sort of dictated on that, but also the comfort. And I must also state that as an undergraduate, I developed under the mentorship of an advisor, Dr. Randy Simpson at the university, who effectively took me on as a graduate student. So there was a lot of comfort. I saw this man as a mentor. He's still one of my closest friends and still a mentor to this day. I just had coffee with him last week. So everything was sort of comfortable and convenient, but that's not necessarily, the great reason to stick around. It was almost essential
Hmm.
for me to be able to continue to pursue studies when I really also needed to kind of get life going and support for my son and my family.
Yeah, no, that's
So that was
great.
that was the decision making process.
Yeah, I mean, priorities. We all deal with realities in our life, and a lot of people that would have derailed them. As we all know, it's hard to make it in wildlife and conservation fields, and so something like that, would have derailed people, and they would have been out working
Mm,
somewhere else to get some money real quick. And you can't fault anybody for that, but it's a pretty amazing story that you were able to, um, you know, kind of maintain your career trajectory while raising your son. So I think that's a great decision. I
Thank you.
like to think
Thank
I
you.
would have made the same one. But anyway, so you're at Texas State for your master's, and you're working, was it with Professor Simpson or Stimpson, did you say?
Simpson, Dr. Randy Simpson.
And so talk a little bit. I'm assuming it was a thesis degree, so you had a field project of some sort. How did you end up? Kind of developing your ideas for that and launching the project?
Well, I'll share with you that my research was not the most innovative or groundbreaking, but boy, it was one of the most enriching couple of years of my life. The study that I was originally going to investigate was, telemetry tracking a population of cottonmouth snakes here in central Texas along the Guadalupe River. That project, although we had won some funding, we were having some IUCOOK issues and delays, and I was on a timeline. I couldn't languish in graduate school. So effectively, I started out with a different graduate advisor, Dr. Francis Rose. But because of the misalignment on timing and some issues, we effectively switched, and I went under Dr. Randy Simpson, and that was because as a backup plan, I proposed a different research project, which was to investigate some Central Texas wetlands. Dr. Gerald Round had done a thesis on during his graduate studies at University of Texas in the 50s during the drought of record, and was investigating the reptiles and amphibians of the Central Texas wetlands around Austin, Texas. For those that are familiar with Central Texas, this is right around Palmetto State Park near Gonzales, Texas. But this is an interesting complex of wetlands that supports some of the westernmost influences of eastern species. And so what I proposed was to try to repeat that study as best we could, and then incorporating modern techniques and evaluating any differences between the assemblages of reptiles and amphibians together and separately, and then also the techniques with which we survey for broad biodiversity within this field. That project, again, wasn't the most groundbreaking, but it was some of the most fun, hands-on, experiential, and then also learning how to manage volunteers, because there was a lot of opportunities to bring people into the project. It was a really, really good and fun project, and we did find some interesting distinctions between our results and the previous results 50 years prior.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how far apart. So about 50 years between the surveys.
Correct.
And were you focused on frogs, or just a whole suite of reptiles and amphibians? What was the focus?
Like so many other elements of my life, I really took on all of it and too much. And even though the project focused primarily on reptiles and amphibians, it was also inclusive of mammals, because I just can't get enough of nature in general. So we had some Sherman trapping going on and some camera trapping going on to kind of get a handle on the mammal assemblage too. But the primary focus was reptiles and amphibians together.
Gotcha. And so what? So you said the original studies 50 years ago; those were done at a time of like extreme high water, extreme flooding. Is that what you said?
Well, no, this actually occurred during what we call the drought of record in Texas.
Oh, the drought of record. I heard flood of record. Okay, so drought of record. So the opposite.
Yeah, the complete opposite. And I'm very liable to misspeak sometimes. So apologies if I said flood, but definitely the drought of record. This was an intense drought, and not dissimilar from what we're actually going through right now. But really, this was the moment. It was the driest and most challenging for those species that rely on those microclimates. And so at the time, we were also going through not as an intense a drought as we are now, but a very intense drought. So it was kind of like the best apples to apples sort of meteorologically that we could come up with. So it was opportunistic as much as anything.
Gotcha. So what were some of those major differences you saw over that 50-year window?
Yeah, interestingly, whereas a Tantilla species, a little diminutive snake was one of the most common species observed by Dr. Round during his time out there. It was a species that was completely absent from my research. And to date, I am uncertain of any observations because I do continue to keep track to see, I like to see iNaturalist observations to tell what I missed.
Mm-hmm.
And we still don't see any of those animals showing up there. Likewise, also both species of box turtle that were associated with the area. Now that's a landscape issue. This is a heavy agriculture county, and
Mm-hmm.
so certainly understandable, like where we've lost box turtles throughout so much of the state. Not a surprise there, but the Tantilla was a really interesting one.
What is
And
that?
then
It's a crown snake. I'm assuming it's a common name of some type. Is it?
yeah, I think it's the black-headed snake or flat-headed snake. I think Tantilla gracilis, I think, is the one.
Yeah. I'm assuming they eat some type of invertebrates, like many of the tantillas. So.
Right, and it's like strangely a species you find very commonly other places directly adjacent. I just don't know what's happened here
Huh.
to cause that. Or if it's actually if one of us was misrepresenting our effort or just have some different techniques, but you figure on a long enough timeline with iNaturalists and people taking pictures and reporting observations that if it is there, it will show up. And I've never been able to figure out the why. I can only tell you the what we saw.
Yeah, huh. Interesting. Great. So you end up finishing up your degree there at Texas State. Before we leave Texas State, this is a little aside, but I want to give a little plug to my where my buddy works, and we talked about this. But on campus, and I'm going to have you explain it better than me because I've talked to my buddy a lot about it, and I'm dying to see it, but I haven't. But there's this incredible resource called the Meadow Center, and a good friend of mine runs the educational programs there. But just for the audience, if they're ever in San Marcos, Austin, San Antonio region, describe that center for folks because it sounds like a place that's really cool.
Well, first off, I'll share that I in my current life, I manage a ranch near Fredericksburg that is owned by the founder of the Meadow Center, Dr. Andy Sansom.
Okay.
And Andy was the founding executive director there. He just retired a couple of years ago. So a lot of what we see was has his fingerprints all over it. So I know quite a bit about the history there, and I'm really proud to be adjacent to it, although I never worked for the Meadow Center. But the Meadow Center sits in a historic hotel that overlooks the headwaters of the San Marcos River. The headwaters are impounded to form Spring Lake, and it's this beautiful, crystal clear, entirely spring-fed body of water that is right there adjacent to campus in downtown San Marcos. From there flows downstream the San Marcos River, one of the most beautiful and iconic rivers of Central Texas, and surely a beautiful asset for all the students at Texas State University and the larger community around. The Meadow Centers offers these beautiful they're historic boats. And if you see one, you'll know, but they take people on tours on these glass bottom boat rides where they accommodate about 20 or 30 folks in there, and you're looking at a glass plate below your feet. And although it feels like you could almost reach out and touch the bottom, it's 30 feet of water that's crystal clear and pure. And you can actually see the springs at the bottom of this 30-foot column just bubbling up as the recharge and aquifer pushes that water to the surface. An incredible land feature. And then the Meadow Center itself does incredible work. To your point, they do a bit of community outreach and engagement, education. And they've actually worked with me here at the Devils River Conservancy as facilitators for a watershed protection plan, a watershed management plan that we kind of sponsored for our community on the Devils River, much further west of San Marcos, actually about 4 hours west. So there's a lot of cool connection between great conservation work writ large in Texas, but also, the outreach and access opportunity to such an incredible feature distinct to Central Texas.
Yeah, Very, very cool. Yeah, everybody needs to go see that. It sounds like, and you keep saying San Marcos. I've been saying San Marcos. So that's how locals. You said you've been naturalized, right? And so you are technically a local.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
how locals say it's San Marcos.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a quick break and tell you that the Orianne Society is dedicated to protecting some of North America's most at-risk species and their habitats, like eastern indigo snakes in the longleaf savannas, eastern hellbenders in the Appalachian highlands, and wood turtles in the great northern forests. Healthy ecosystems depend on these incredible animals, but these landscapes and species need our help to survive. If you care about reptiles, amphibians, and the wild places they call home, visit www.orianne.org to learn more about our work and how you can get involved.
That's right. And, we have there's lots of right ways to say something. So I'm not going to suggest that you're saying it wrong. But what I'll say is that the right way that people say it locally is San Marcos. And certainly you hear a lot of folks say San Marcos, which, I know there's other towns named that, and they're called San Marcos. But, in Texas, you're known as a local or a local adjacent by the way that you pronounce lots of different words that don't sound anything like the way that they're spelled or that you're familiar with.
Well, that's how, and it's like that to some degree all across the country with place names. And the way I always go by, it's the people that live there. They decide how you pronounce the place that they live. And so I always strive to learn that. We don't call it, it's Oregon. It's not Oregon, or it's Nevada. And so anyways. But we can leave that topic. But I'm glad
100%. You can spend a lot of time on that topic.
I know. I'm glad I now know how to pronounce San Marcos. So, anyways, well, let's move on. So let's continue in your timeline. So you're finishing your master's degree, doing this kind of the second chapter in this long-term kind of monitoring of these wetlands. And then, so you finish up at the university, and then where does life take you next?
Well, I go through a program that is kind of a traditional wildlife management program. I learned a lot about game management. I think it was pretty clear from the get-go that I was, although I was certainly interested in game management, I was very much more interested in non-game management. And but the beginnings of my career started actually within grad school. I joined a small wildlife consulting firm based out of Dripping Springs here in Central Texas called Plateau Land and Wildlife as a field technician. And I was out filling feeders and putting out ant bait to control imported red fire ants and doing a little bit of songbird monitoring, that sort of thing. After grad school, I transitioned straight into full-time into that role, and I worked there for another 5 years, going from a technician to a consulting senior wildlife biologist, managing an office based out of San Antonio, staff, and about 14 county service region. And a lot of that work was more through the lens of, in Texas, we have a really interesting property tax valuation opportunity where landowners can manage their property for the benefit of wildlife. And if they follow a certain number of activities to a certain standard, they can qualify for a very favorable property tax rate. Mm-hmm. It's not an exemption. They still pay taxes, and those taxes are akin to traditional agricultural taxes if you're producing off your ranch. So I did a lot of consulting in that field, and the reality was, although it was great and enriching to learn how to work with landowners in particular, and how to learn from landowners in particular, it was very single serving, and in my opinion, a bit too single serving. And I was more focused on durable relationships that lent to landscape scale conservation and unity within that landscape management unity. So I eventually kind of made a jump over to the land trust world, working with the conservation easement tool. And in that pivot, created some more increasing opportunities, I think, to kind of fulfill my personal mission, which was inclusive of not just land and water conservation. Those are essential pieces of the habitat equation for these species that I actually care the most about. The species were always my driver, but the landscape and the water conservation and management were essential tools with which to secure thriving populations. Altogether, this lent to lots of opportunities to exploring the state, because there's no corner where these tools aren't appropriate, and there's no corner of this predominantly private land state where there's not landowners that have needs or interests. And so that opened up a lot of gates, a lot of opportunities, which had the duality of affecting conservation, but also exploring the state and not just the public spaces of the state. And once you get behind private lands, a lot of times you get to some of the best versions of habitat or representative landscape in the state. And so that was just an enriching moment. That's the first half of my career. That's well before where we are right now. But that was the formative moments before leadership really took place.
Yeah. So which land trusts were you working with in the early days, or did you bounce around some? What did that look like?
So the first land trust I worked with was a small outfit. They're actually not even open anymore. They transferred and enrolled a lot of their easements and their business into another bigger land trust. But the land trust was called the Hill Country Land Trust. It was based out of Fredericksburg, which is about an hour and a half west of Austin, and focused predominantly in our really kind of granitic mineral type of feature within Central. It's like a small landscape within a larger landscape. It's very interesting. But we have this state natural area, state park called Enchanted Rock that most people in Texas are familiar with, and I would assume quite a few people outside of Texas
I've been there.
Visited. That would be the anchor of this landscape and this land trust's work. So I worked with them as a board member, first as a volunteer, and very quickly as a board member, as a lot of small nonprofits have those sorts of needs, capacity. And shortly after that, as a volunteer, I was hired on with another outfit, very similar sounding, Hill Country Conservancy, which is based out of Austin, Texas, and whose mission primarily focused on securing groundwater recharge for very important segments of the Edwards Aquifer, with which our communities rely on here in Central Texas and around the Austin area.
Gotcha.
So I was a professional conservation program manager there. I kind of teased that my job was opportunity, finding opportunities and kind of getting them into the funnel, and then handing those opportunities off to my boss, who was kind of more the negotiator, closer for conservation easement deals.
Gotcha.
Very relationship focused.
Yeah. So I want to get on to the Devils River Conservancy, but first I want to just go explore this other topic that I teased in the beginning of this episode. And, I think most listeners are probably familiar with this concept that there's thousands and thousands of fanatic birders out there, and they've taken their hobby and they've figured out a whole variety of ways to to kind of measure and just kind of move forward this interest. And now we have obviously the developing, maybe analogous group of people, the field herpers. And when we were having our conversation earlier, you mentioned this concept of a big year, and anybody who's a birder or knows much about birders will know that that's a thing. That's a defined thing within the birding world. But you decided to develop a reptile-based version of a big year within Texas. So I want to hear about that. But first of all, how did this idea even come about for you?
Yeah, I'll have to share that I actually had an aversion to birds for most of my life. I don't know why. I mean, I guess they're somewhat over-evolved reptiles or something. But I realized, though, towards the end of my graduate school studies that most of the people that I had seen move on and do things, most of the best sounding jobs had a lot of birds related to them. There's a lot of bird survey opportunities, bird monitoring opportunities. And so I developed some skill around bird identity in college. Thank goodness I had a professor and that really kind of instilled in us an appreciation for that, Dr. David Huffman. And so he helped me tune my ear to hear them. I was sort of naturally able to transition that because I had learned how to identify frog calls. So, and that's a smaller repertoire, but I was able to develop a birding repertoire pretty quick via ear, and that tool allowed me to go out into the workforce and do a lot of bird surveys so that you're not just doing monotonous report writing. You actually get more field exposure and compensation through that. And I learned that there's a whole birding culture and birding community. And let me tell you, not attracted to it in the beginning, and in some ways not attracted to it much now, although I'm now currently serving as the president of Texas Ornithological Society, which is our largest state-based bird group. But the appeal to birding was that, and I didn't get this from grad school. I got kind of the phenomenon and connections to concepts and research, but what I didn't get and understand and appreciate until I did it with birds was how they represent not just places, but just individuality in the sense of, for instance, the Kalima warbler in the United States, you can only find it. It only breeds in the United States in the Chisos Basin and Chisos Mountains of Big Bend National Park. Or that there are a certain set of coastal species, a suite of coastal species that very much are representative. What you see coming through migration is different than what you see during the breeding season. And there was a lot of appeal to traveling, to see these species with your own eyes. I always talk about, I love to take what's written in the field guide and actually see it with my own eyes so that I feel it in my heart better. And that's really what birding did, was help me overcome some general malaise around, I wasn't really enthusiastic about traveling. I actually had a lot of anxiety about traveling, but there was a need to explore these landscapes that had these very interesting characters that represented the landscape or a phenomenon. And so that's how I kind of learned about the culture of birding, including birding big years and birding big days and things like that. And I had an immense amount of fun with the friend group that I developed in my own age guild at the time, exploring the states, challenging ourselves to see different things. And then, but undoubtedly, as things often happen, as time goes by, you can circle back to the things that you were always resonating with, which for me were the herps. And I started to kind of find a subculture of herpers, which to a degree is different and similar to birders, both in good and bad ways. But what I found out is that there's a community, and then I learned more through that community, and with the familiarity of a birding big year, I just thought, wouldn't this be a cool project? And studied on it for a couple of years. How would you put one on? What would be the ground rules? It's not necessarily apples to apples. For instance, do DORs count as a observation? Certainly they wouldn't in the birding world. So I kind of created my own sort of rules. And one year I just said, I'm going to do it. I shared it with a network of friends and created a social media account or used my social media account to kind of share what I was learning along the way, the photographs, and it turned into something special. I had another friend that worked at A&M University, Connor. I'd observed him do big year type things before, and he would have immense numbers.
So describe, how did you define? So it was for all herps. It wasn't just for snakes, or
right.
So how did you define your herp big year? What were you trying to do?
I was trying to see everything I could. Texas had around 225, 230 species that could be observed in the state, and I wanted to see as many, if not all of them, as I could, and for the proof. And a lot of people can be skeptical about what someone thinks that they saw. My rules were photograph or recording in the case of calling anurans. So a lot of this was photo based, and all of my records were going to be put into iNaturalist to allow for scrutiny from skeptics. And I did allow myself to have a percentage of observations be DORs, and that way they were declared dead on road, and they were declared so that anybody that might want to challenge whatever my number might be could do so with an apples to apples comparison. They could decide to pull it out and compare. That I got all live animals, and I beat the live animal number. So I put as much. I put everything in there that I could into iNaturalist, photographs. This also was a time when I was developing a photography habit, which got pretty reasonably progressed during the course of this year. And herps continue to be my favorite photography subjects. But that was it. Travel the state, try to time activity and abundance.
Yeah, I was going to say, how much of it was like, so first of all, Texas is a really large state, incredibly, diverse topographically, just kind of ecoregion wise. You got everything from longleaf in the east and Gulf coastal plain and these subtropical ecosystems and high, what is it, like Chihuahuan Desert even comes into West Texas. So it's just incredibly diverse. You got these plains up in the Panhandle that are completely different.
Right.
And so big place, a lot of ecoregions. How did you have a plan, or were you just kind of like completely going by the seat of your pants and be like, oh, I'm heading to the national forest today? And how did that come together?
Yeah, I did have a plan. It wasn't a master plan. It was a roughed out, back a napkin plan. And the reality too is that I have the constraints of being a full-time, have a full-time job. And at the time I was working for the National Audubon Society as the state director of conservation for Texas. And so it wasn't like a small job. It had a lot of requirements. But within that job, I had a lot of opportunities to travel on work business and just extend those trips and squeeze in some herping as the opportunities presented themselves. So timing was more tricky than travel. All of this, when I wasn't trying to, piggyback on a work trip, was on my own dime, my own time. I used all of my vacation that I'd been stacked up, effectively put towards trips for this project. And you're right, geographic representation is essential to meeting the biodiversity question, or seeing the full spectrum of biodiversity in the state. So, you would time activity according to which geography was most active. For instance, in January, timing some of our bigger salamanders out in the East Texas piney lands during those first, warmish winter rains at the end of the season, they get active. Jumped over there, had a great friend, Matt Buckingham, show me the ropes on how to see some of these salamanders. That trip was the first time that I saw 4 of those species. So had some great tutelage there, but also knew that, effectively, if I'm going to do this, I need to see those there. And where else are you going to go on chilly days in January for diversity? So that was a great launching point. But conversely, Chris, you've been out in West Texas, that the activity really gins up around that late May, June, July period. So, I didn't really have a lot of reasons to go there much earlier than that. And that allowed me to focus on other areas that were more temperate and active, like South Texas. South Texas was gangbusters. And again, fortunately tied back to work, I had the Audubon Society owned a preserve at the very southern tip of Texas and near Brownsville.
Yeah, I've been there.
That was my reason. Sable Palm Sanctuary. So I had reasons. I created, didn't create, but there was some work that needed to be done there. And I took that work and said, I'll do it. And so I got several trips to go down there to do bona fide work for Audubon. But while there, that was my home base while I could meet with other friends, learn the ropes of South Texas herping, and very, very luckily caught a tropical storm while I was down there and got to see that collection of Mexican frogs that just teeter into the southern United States at those couple of counties in South Texas. And I got to see all of those, which helped, of course, in the end tally. So timing, geography, trying to balance work and play, and then also, not giving up. A year is a long time.
Yeah.
And there's there's all sorts of challenges that can happen in anybody's life. So just being able to survive to the end, and we were adding species up until the last days of January. I think the last species that I added was like the day after Christmas. So 360th day of the year, still collecting species.
Yeah, and so what did you say? There's 270 something species in Texas. Was that right?
Generally around 230 is what we're listing. And that number, of course, goes up and down. Exotics,
Yep.
How these guys are splitting or lumping species. So, it changes minute to minute, publication to publication.
And so how many species did you find in total?
Well, originally I published that we found 178 species, but I've had to recant that down one. One of the lizards that I claimed to have found was re-identified. I misidentified it. The dune sagebrush lizard is not on the list. It was a very light morph young side blotch lizard that I got confused with. Okay. So 177 is the official total. 225 to 230 is kind of what the opportunity was in the state.
Did you have was there that one species or one group of species that was like your nemesis? Like you kept going back to this one place, trying to find them over and over, and you either never did or you finally had this eureka type moment?
Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a break and tell you guys that snakes are one of the most persecuted groups of animals in the world, but we are dedicated to changing that. The Orianne Society works every day to ensure there's a future for these amazing animals. If you care about snakes, wildlife, or wild places, and you like what you've been hearing on the Snake Talk podcast, support us today by donating on our website at www.orianne.org.
I'll share that there was two cases of that. One that had a successful end and another one that had a not successful end. I'll share the successful end first. I did a lot of hiking in the Davis Mountains searching for mountain shorthorn lizard. And that is probably the most effort that I put into a single species to eventually find it. And then conversely, the one that I didn't find that put a lot of effort into, and this is going to be a surprise to a lot of folks, was the eastern hognose snake. And,
oh, really?
Just one that in certain circumstances can be one of the more common species that you could find. I never found one, and that was kind of a heartbreaking when I have such a soft spot for hoggies. But I found both flavors of the West Texas. I think it's the Western complex, the Plains, and the Mexican, in actually fairly good abundance, which had historically always been more of the nemesis of the two groups.
What's their range in East Texas? Eastern hognose?
Eastern hognose goes all the way from East Texas all the way through up through the western part of Central Texas.
Oh, really?
So
you could have found this thing in your backyard. No, I'm not. Here I am talking trash.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, one of my birder friends, Jennifer Bristol, was constantly sending me pictures of her hognose in her backyard just a few miles here in Austin, and I just never got over there to I'll find it eventually. And then when I needed it, of course, hers was never around. So it was a mess. It was disheartening. But you need a few of those easy ones not on the list to appreciate everything that you did accomplish.
Were you able to get a gray-banded king snake or?
No.
Yep.
No, and I still haven't. I've never seen a wild one in my life.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I've seen a wild one caught by others and brought to the circle at the end of the day, but I've never gone. We're going to change that this year. That's going to be the central focus of this season's efforts.
Gotcha. Okay. How about where you said you were doing it with some other people. Did you have people that you were actively doing it with? Yeah. Were people doing it with you but independent of you? Were you always out together? Did you spark something across the state and you had other people doing it either then or now? Talk a little bit about that part of it.
Well, there's almost several questions packed into that one, but I'll say that my number one ride or die was my wife. She is as almost she may not like me using almost, but I would say she's almost as fanatical about them as I am. She has a high amount of appreciation for wildlife in general. We're both wildlife biologists. So she was with me as much as she could. She had a little bit more constraint with her work and vacation time, etc. But I also had several friends. I mentioned going out and meeting Matt Buckingham in East Texas and Scott Wahlberg and several other friends, and kind of learning. I would use the folks that were local to that community that were friendly to me and willing to share. And there's a lot of trust too. That, I'm not just a guy that's going to blow up people's spots and things like that. So I had a lot of very fortunate goodwill, but a lot of these folks are actually truly, truly good friends. Show me the road. My another really great friend, Greg Hall, was a big part of the year with me. He's he's kind of not as big into herping these days. He's still a huge herper. He just works, so committed to work. But he was with me for some big trips. And it's just that camaraderie, you can go further into the night because you're having a good conversation. And your enthusiasm bounces off each other, can keep you motivated. So yeah, truly lots of friends, helped out. They gave good notes, shared some spots to try out. And that's really where this was really a community project, that I got to be the face of. Back to the last question you asked, did it spark or motivate folks? I undoubtedly, 100%. I got to publish an article in Texas Parks and Wildlife magazine the year after the big year was shared. I kind of shared some of my stories and a little bit about the big picture. We've heard that has inspired, especially a lot of young people and parents that had kids interested in these sorts of same things. But my social media account really kind of blew up during this time. Not blew up crazy, but I had a couple hundred friends, and now I got a couple thousand followers, and a lot of it was because of the quality of the photographs, but pairing them with the vignettes from the field, the stories from the field, are what really got folks kind of captivated and in those moments, and understanding why nerds are sitting on the side of the road at midnight with lights and reflective vests on, shining on rocks. And sharing not just that, it's not just a Pokemon Go collection type of thing, but also that these animals represent bigger picture concepts, ideas, and geographies. And that's what I really loved to share about the project. It was not the reason, although people take from it whatever they see or sense. My reason was to explore the state in this very special way.
Yeah. Huh. Fascinating. So, has anybody beat your record yet? Do you know?
I haven't heard of anybody that's beat this record. I do want to give my buddy Connor a shout out. He had pretty much the high water mark in the low 140s, which when I sat down with that initial plan that you and I discussed a little earlier in the call, I just said, if I can get there or meet or just exceed, that would be incredible. That was my aspirational goal, was to meet or beat Adam's 142, 144 record. But really just anywhere between where I had been previously. I'd set my own personal high water mark around 105 at one point, one year. But what we found was, I think I almost got to, 140 about midway through the year, and we kept pushing and pushing, and closed out the year with that 177. And since then, I don't think anybody's really come too close. And there's not very many states outside of Texas, Florida and maybe California, where you could even really do this, do these types of numbers. So, and I don't have any idea what folks are doing over there, but I like to pretend like Texas is number one, and folks from those other states can hear this as a challenge. And it can be, because I think that as we explore our states and explore the biodiversity of our states and hopefully share those stories, we're also putting a spotlight and platforming some species that don't really get that sort of spotlight and platform very often. So I welcome the competition.
Yeah. Yeah. We could do that in Georgia for sure. We've got 40 some odd snake species. We've got one of the highest numbers of frog species, incredible salamander diversity. So I don't know off the top of my head, I should know, but there's pretty impressive lists of herps in Georgia too. So I assume it
We,
would be over 200. So
I would I would challenge the herping community and whoever the folks are that stand on top of the fiefdom of field herping and biodiversity to kind of create some sort of structure that isn't just yahoos from each state kind of creating their own rules and say here's technically how one would be done, and here's generally where we're going to keep the records for each state, or and incorporate that in whatever magazine or blog. It's such a cool concept, and one that is fanatical and somewhat weird in the birding community, but you also see that it inspires and motivates people to do things, and then that motivation and inspiration turns into data and or outreach and education. So there's a lot of really good to think about it other than just being competitive. And I hate to tell folks, it's not unlike Pokemon collecting, but it is what it is. We all have human nature, except my human nature is I like to actually see the animals and not a card.
Mm-hmm. Well, shifting gears, before we close out, I do want to talk a little bit about conservation and, your current role. I mentioned in the beginning that Devils River Conservancy. And so I guess let's just start that out by tell us about the Devils River. It's watershed. Where is it?
Well,
what's it like? Why is it important? Those types of things.
The Devils River in Texas is located in kind of the southwestern corner, generally north of Del Rio. And another way to look at this is the westernmost end of the Edwards Plateau ecoregion of Central Texas, or the gateway to far west Texas. So there's lots of ways to look at the Devils River, but it is generally considered to be the most pristine and one of the most iconic rivers in the state of Texas. It's 100% spring flow. And, you and I are on a video call. You can see the photograph above my right shoulder here. That is a photograph of the Devils River. So you have a spring-fed river cutting through what is obviously a very desert-like landscape and a very hilly and rugged desert-like landscape. What's the characteristic that defines the river is that spring-fed quality, the pristine quality, but also the landscape that surrounds it that allows for these features is so remote and rugged. It's a challenge to get to it. So man hasn't really had a huge amount of interest or opportunity to impair this river. There's a lot of recreational interest, and this is one of those rivers that's very fragile and can be loved to death very easily. But because it's surrounded by primarily by private lands, it's protected by private land stewardship. So the same thing that kind of prevents ease of access is also lending to its continued conservation. And in Texas, a predominantly private land state with over 95% of the land coverage in private hands and less than 1% in publicly accessible lands. This is a model we have to contend with that's different than a lot of the other Western states, at least.
What are the stream access laws in Texas? I mean, can people legally float navigable water?
Yes.
Okay, but can they touch?
It is this is a navigable river, but it has very limited access points. There's only two publicly unpermitted public access spots, and then there's a couple of we have two state natural areas which are managed by the state park system, but there's permitted access at those sites. So it is publicly accessible there, but it's also permitted. So it's a very thoughtful system. And what I like about this is that this landscape is predominantly been saved and preserved intact, which is the mission of the Devils River Conservancy: treasure, preserve, protect the Devils River and the landscape. It's been preserved intact by the private landowners as much as the investments of the state. And we've arrived at this moment predominantly through a very conservative Texas model that seems to work. And it doesn't work in a lot of places, but it has worked here. The state or the county that the river sits entirely, the wet portion of the Devils River sits entirely within the county of Valverde County, which if you imagine Big Bend National Park, and everybody knows that bend and why it's called that, well, there's another one just after it goes kind of north and it turns back south, that's another big bend. And generally where that other big bend is where this river dumps into Lake Amistad, just to help folks with the orientation there. And Val Verde County, where the river sits within, has over 200,000 acres of voluntary conservation easements on private lands. So these landowners have locked their land. It won't be divided into subdivisions or Walmarts or things like that. And so they've made this ultimate sacrifice to assure that we continue to have this pristine river. Over 200,000 acres makes us that Val Verde County #1 out of 254 counties in the state of Texas, and it's really not even close. #2 is pretty far behind us now, and of those 200,000+ acres, we've added about 65,000 acres in the last 3 years. So it's a culture that has both existed and is experiencing a renaissance because of the importance and our need. In a private land state with voluntary tools and not a lot of regulation, we need a shining example of what success looks like. And to me, in Texas, that's what success looks like in a private land state.
Huh, amazing. So what's the, think about the whole watershed, those rugged hills you're talking about and the water, obviously. What's kind of the main land use around there? Are they grazing? Are they pumping water for like row crops? Right. Is it just kind of like recreational farms, very wealthy people that have kind of just like, fun properties, if you will?
Yeah, I think a lot, it's very similar to a lot of big landscapes in the state of Texas. So this particular landscape probably started predominantly with goat and sheep operations, a little bit of cattle, during settlement and the 1900s. And it's transitioned here when hunting became more of an economic driver. So there's a lot of lease hunting, recreational hunting, where landowners are leasing or providing opportunities to folks from the bigger cities to be able to escape and take a deer. A lot of times folks are, they're out there to deer hunt, but they're really just out there to find some peace and solace, and solace. And so the land uses are kind of mixed now. There's still a remnant of the goat and sheep production here in the upper watershed. Predominant uses are for recreational hunting and lease hunting, with a combination of fishing and paddling, especially along the landowners along the river. And then we're seeing more and more, it's driving fragmentation to a degree, but like more and more smaller parcels, 100-acre, 200-acre parcels being sold to folks that probably look a lot like me, that are in their prime earning years, and they want their own piece of Texas to manage and enjoy. And that's driving some pressures out in that area, but it's a mixed bag all together, and everybody's trying to make best do with what they got out there, and not let the land be a complete liability, but also be able to generate some income to offset the cost of managing and operating.
Last question about the Conservancy. So, what are some of the cool snakes you find in the Devils River watershed? What would people expect if they were out in that region?
Well, I can't prove this out with primary literature, but it's my understanding that the Big Bend, what is it? Cuculata, Tantilla cuculata, the giant Big Bend black-headed snake. The type specimen was collected from the Devils River. One of the other really cool species that show up here is the alligator lizard that I love. We do have indigo snakes that teeter up into that desert landscape. You wouldn't think indigo snakes. They're right there. Mm-hmm. Indigo snakes, a variety of rattlesnakes, rock rattlesnakes, black-tailed rattlesnakes. And then, of course, everybody's favorite, there was a lot of hunting for gray-banded king snakes on the rock cuts in Val Verde County, and you can imagine, you can see the landscape above my head. It really is a gem of a landscape for hunting gray bands if you have access. Mm-hmm. The rock cuts have been hunted pretty hard, and I think that they're not putting out like they once did in this eastern edge of their range, but certainly we're still finding them there. There was one observed during a BioBlitz that we helped put on with Texas Parks and Wildlife at one of the state natural areas last year, an October discovery, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So, it's abundant. Bears, rat snakes are one of our more common species, and those can be pretty exciting for folks that that don't see them all the time. And that represents, you're pushing into some of the easternmost extent of its range. So there's just a variety. But what I would also say is come with tempered expectations, because although there is a variety and diversity, there just doesn't seem to be immense abundance. You can spend a lot of time looking and not have a ton of payoff like you might further west. It's just the reality of this landscape. It's got a lot of good stuff, just hard to find at times.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Well, I'll have to check it out. And sounds like you're doing some pretty amazing conservation work, just even in the last few years. So that's great. Well,
thank you.
Before we wrap up, as you know, I like to have all of my guests tell me a story. So, Romey, what's your best snake story?
Well, I'll share one that comes to mind, and my during the herping big year, I had just a complete fascination with trying to find a western pygmy rattlesnake in Texas. And unlike other places, western pygmy rattlesnakes can be very difficult to find. And there's a couple of spots that put out fairly well and are known. And I never really had a lot of opportunity to go hunt those. But I was out in East Texas doing some bird survey work for Big Thicket National Preserve. My wife and I have a little contract to do some of their monitoring for birds each year. And we used that opportunity to piggyback and go herping each evening. And during the herping big year, I had one of my best friends who subcontracts on that project with me, and we all went up to the Santa Angelina forest to a little in-holding and just did some road cruising. And that period of time in the late evening, it's not quite dark. There's just enough light, and you can pop on your highs, you can put on your light bar, and it doesn't really do anything. You can't see. You're just waiting a little bit longer, and that's where we were. That's the moment in the day we were. But we were also moving because we wanted to see if there's big things out, you'll see them. But if there's small things out, you're not going to see them very well. And I remember driving by and seeing something out of the corner of my eye before it was lost over the hood in that weird dim light. And I stopped because right in the last moment I recognized, it's like, either that's a funky hognose, which, I was looking for, and that's what was in my head, or it's something else, or just a stick. And I remember stepping out of my truck, looking down, not having my light on, and there it was, a little western pygmy rattlesnake, the only one that we saw. And it was as if the loudest Comanche whoop had ever entered into the forest of East Texas. That was a golden moment, and one where my excitement was like transcended into my best bud, who's a naturalist, who's super interested in everything. But like he was just like, he was in awe just because he knew it was a special moment. And for, 30 or so minutes, we didn't road cruise. We just enjoyed taking some photographs of that particular snake. But that one's the most special. I was asked to do to kind of rank all of the special observations I had that year, and that one by far is number one. Just a payout of seeking and searching and not having a ton of hope, being with the most important people in your life, my wife and best friend, out in a landscape that is still kind of foreign. We don't live in East Texas. We visit it. I have a high amount of appreciation for it. And then the opportunity to go back and tell folks about it. Like, man, this is a really cool snake. It's smaller and it's not nasty. Everybody thinks a rattlesnake's nasty. And then we took some really great images, and one of those images won a photography contest in our state chapter of the Wildlife Society. So lots of good stuff there. And I think, Chris, if I just kind of extend a little bit longer, the other thing about snakes is sharing those Instagram stories during that year. I think one of the most rewarding, other than seeing the animals, was hearing from the people reporting back that now they know what a hognose looks like and what it represents, and that it has those fun behaviors, and that's a very common snake in their backyards. And getting those direct messages says, Romey, I want you to know, I don't really like snakes, but I can handle a hognose, and they are not getting spaded anymore at my house. We just move them, and they get to live. And it's because, you shared with me, and I finally believed you what it is that are good about snakes. So those types of stories are really important, paired with those exploration moments like I described just previously.
Yeah, great story. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you came on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to thank the audience and tell everybody to remember, snakes are animals too, and it's a privilege to see one in the wild.